Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make a cherry cake, and this is what it looks like. This cake is buttery, it's light, it's moist, it has a nice almond flavor, and it's full of sweet cherries both in the batter and, as you can see, sitting on top. So it gives our cake a nice polka dot design. And then I like to garnish after baking with some toasted and finely chopped almonds. So the first thing that you will need to do is preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 200 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a 9-inch springform pan, that's 23 centimeters. Springform pan comes in two pieces like this, the bottom plate and the sides. I like this because we have the cherries on top, and that way we don't have to, like with a regular cake pan, you have to flip it over. This way all we got to do is undo the sides. But I know some people don't have a springform pan. You could use a regular 9-inch, 23 centimeter cake pan, but use one with 2-inch sides. It's about 5 centimeters. Now you could butter the inside of your pan, or today I'm taking the easy way. I'm just going to use one of these non-stick sprays. And then I like to take a piece of parchment paper and put it in the bottom. What I like to do is just kind of lightly put it down, and then if I can get it, flip it over so there's a little bit of the butter or oil on the paper, and that way it won't stick so much to the bottom of our cake. So there we go. Now, before we start our batter, there's a little bit of prep with this cake. First, you will need a half a cup, which is 113 grams of butter. I'm using unsalted butter. I like the flavor. And with unsalted, that way I can control the amount of salt in my cake. But if you have a favorite salted butter you like to use, you can. And then just leave out the salt in the recipe. You do need to melt it. I just did it in a small saucepan. You could do it in the microwave. And then we're going to let that cool. Of course, we need cherries. We are using, like I said, sweet cherries. I'm using the Bing type. You will need 3/4 of a pound, which is about 350 grams. So this is your cherry. You need, as always, you need to wash your fruit and take off the stems. Now for this, we are putting some of the cherries in the cake and then some on top. So you will need to take, of your 3/4 of a pound, take out 15 of the cherries. These are going to be for the top of the cake. We're going to cut them in half. I'll show you how to do that later, because we don't put the cherries on the batter like right at the beginning when we put it in the oven. We actually just bake the cake part way and then put the cherries on top. That way they won't sink down because we want to see them. To the rest of the cherries, you need to, finely chop them, which I've already done. This is, okay, it's a messy job. I did it off camera because it's messy. There's a couple ways you can take your cherries. Which I recommend this handy little cherry pitter tool, and I'm not going to do it because I have white counters. Actually, when you do this, because if you use a cherry pitter like this, it does kind of spray a bit, so I do it over the sink. You put your cherry in there and then you press down and the pit will come out the bottom. But there's always a little spray, so I'm not going to do it. If you're cutting them by hand, if you don't want to stain your hands all red, you can wear gloves, which I did, so I didn't have. But I'll show you, I'll take one of these, if you do it by hand. Just on a cutting board, I just cut it in half, and then you can usually just twist it, and then the pit, I just kind of, you can do it with your fingers or a knife, just kind of take it out, and then just finely chop, so each, maybe 6-8 pieces. So that's how you would chop it by hand. Okay, so we need this. We have the butter, and for our dry ingredients, In a separate bowl, I have 1 cup, which is 130 grams of all-purpose flour, plain flour. Like I said, the cake has an almond flavor. I think that, complements the flavor of the cherries. So I'm adding a 1/2 cup, 55 grams of ground almonds. I typically you can buy ground almonds. You can find them usually on the baking aisle or in the health food section. If you can't find them or you don't want to do that, you can just take blanched almonds and then just process them until they're finely ground in your food processor. So either way, I'll give you another alternative. If you don't want an almond flavor at all, you could just use substitute the 1/2 cup of ground almonds with just regular 1/2 cup of your AP flour, plain flour. To that, I'm going to add 1½ teaspoons, 6 grams of baking powder, give us a little lift to our cake, and 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram. I'm using fine kosher salt. So just whisk that together. And that's our dry ingredients. To make the batter, if you have a stand mixer like I have, then use your paddle attachment, or you could just use a hand mixer for this. You will need 2 large eggs. 2 large eggs out of the shell is 100 grams. Have your eggs at room temperature. They'll beat up a lot better if they're at room temperature than cold out of the fridge. And then 3/4 cup, 150 grams of granulated white sugar. Now we're going to beat this on high speed until it's really nice and thick and pale color. And that's going to take, in a stand mixer, it could be up to 5 minutes. Could be that long, a little longer with a hand mixer, but just until it's really thick and pale in color. Okay, we are done. So, see this? It's nice and thick. Really pale in color. It's kind of amazing you take eggs and sugar and what you end up with after you beat it. And that's going to give us a really nice light textured cake. So now for flavoring, I am adding 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract. And then we added the ground almonds. I'm going to bump up that almond flavor just a little more and add just 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram of pure vanilla, not vanilla, I did already. Pure almond extract. If you don't, a lot of times you don't have almond extract in your pantry, so you could just leave it out. And I'm just going to beat that in. Okay, so now I'm going to transfer my batter over to a larger bowl so you can really see what I'm doing. If you're at home, you don't have to do this because it just means washing up one more bowl, but I will do it. Because now we are just going to fold in our butter. We're adding a little milk and our dry ingredients. This is kind of like a sponge cake or a genoise, but not quite butter cake because you have butter. I mean, a genoise is similar to this, but you don't usually add as much melted butter as we are adding, but it gives a really nice buttery flavor to our cake. So we have our melted butter. Now mine's like kind of just a touch warm, which is what you want. Now what I could do, because you've got this heavy butter and you have this light batter, you could take a little of your batter and lighten the butter, stir it into the butter, lighten it. The other way is just, what I'm going to do is just pour down the sides, just a little of the butter. And you could use, I like to use a whisk. You could use your spatula for this, but I'm going to whisk it. And that'll lighten the butter a bit. And then what we can do, I'll just put that there. We'll just add our butter. I'm doing it gradually and just whisk, whisk, whisk. The flavor of this cake is just so wonderful. And I love Bing cherries. So typically when they're in season in the summer, at least in the States and in Canada, let's see, summer, I just have to have my fill of just eating them. And then when I've had my fill, which is after a while, then I will bake with them. And one of the first things I bake is this cake. It freezes well and it's just so good. Now I'm going to add 1/3 of a cup, 80 milliliters, 80 grams of milk. Have your milk at room temperature. Whisk that in. You could use, you want a rich cake, the full fat, the whole milk, or you could use, a reduced fat, 2%. That's normally what I have in the house, so I am using a 2% today. And then we have our dry ingredients. Again, I'm adding just, you could sift it over the top, or once you do the prep, this isn't a hard cake to make. I find the cherry part, that takes a while. But like I said, buy a cherry pitter. It does make life easier. And it's not very expensive. Okay. Now this, I will say this is a fairly light batter. And the cherries are heavy. I did cut them into small pieces, but I'm just going to say they do fall to the bottom. But because we're actually, if you see this cake, we're putting some on top. So I don't really care if they fall to the bottom. I mean, you could try tossing the cherries, your cut cherries with a little flour, but I find it doesn't help because the batter is thin, so they're going to fall. But we compensate that with the pretty cherries on top. So now I'm going to, as you can see, when I cut the cherries, I lined my bowl with some paper towel just to absorb some of the moisture of those cherries. And that way, the cherry juice won't stain the batter too much. Not that I mean, you could do that. I don't mind it a little pink, but. So that's our batter. So we have our pan. Now, like I said, once we get this in the oven, I'm going to come back and show you what to do with the rest of those. But we are going to bake this for a bit. We are going to bake it about 14, 15 minutes. Until the top of the cake is firm, it's still a little bit of give, but it's firm. And the reason we do that, because if I tried to put, we're going to half the cherries. If I tried to put the half cherries on right now, they're going to sink down just like the cut up cherries right to the bottom. And I don't want that. I want to see them. So I'm taking an offset spatula, just even it out. You can use back the spoon. But if we let the cake set up just a little and then take it out of the oven and put the cherries on top, they won't sink down. So what a cool trick, eh? So what I'm going to do is, everyone's oven a little different. I'm going to say 14 to 15 minutes. It'll turn the top of the cake will turn a little brown. It's going to be, you want it firm, but just if you push your finger, just a little bit of give. So that way the cherries will sink down just a little. 14 to 15 minutes. So our cake is baking. So now we're going to cut. We have those remaining 15 cherries. So what we're going to do, I have a plate here with some paper towel. And I'm going to do this by hand. You could use your cherry pitter, but I'll show you. Take your cherry, just cut it in half. And then I just kind of twist it and then put a cut side down on your paper towel. You could I just take with my finger, take out the pit and put it like that. So we need to do that while our cake is baking. We need to do all of them. Okay, so it's been about 15 minutes. As you can see, it's turned brown. If you shake it, it's still a little wobbly. That's how you want it. So I'm going to say, 13, 15 minutes, depending on your oven. You can see it's still a little soft. So now what we're going to do right away is place our cherries. I do it in concentric circles. I like to have cut side down, but you can do it any way you want. And if you don't want to do it in circles like I do, you can just randomly place them. I'll leave that up to you. And then what we're going to do is put this back in the oven, probably for another 15 minutes, or until you take a toothpick and insert it into the center and it comes out clean. I think I can just squeeze those last two in here. Okay, that looks pretty even. Okay, so another, say, 15 minutes or until the toothpick. If you find your cake, it's going to turn a really dark golden brown. If you find it's browning too much for your taste, then take a piece of foil and just put it over the top of your pan, and that will prevent it from browning anymore. But I like it really golden brown. Okay, so our cherry cake is done. So put your cake pan on a wire rack. As you can see, beautiful golden brown. It's just starting to separate from the sides of the pan, and then a wooden toothpick inserted into the center came out clean. I didn't say, but you might want to, some people say that their springform pans leak. If you do have that issue, then what you should do is put your pan on a baking sheet, and then you can do that. And then if there is any spillover, it goes on your baking pan, not on the bottom of your oven. So now what we're going to do is just let it sit like this for about 10 minutes. Then I'll release the sides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put an apricot glaze over the top and some toasted almonds around the outside edge. But first we'll let it cool for about 10 minutes. So I let the cake cool about 10 minutes. So I'm just going to undo the clamp here and remove it, and there's our cake. I just think it's so pretty with the polka dots. Well, it looks like a polka dot design. Now, this, if you just want to do it to this point, that's fine. It's wonderful. Actually, for many years, this is all I did. And now I kind of want to take it a little, make it more like what you would get in a bakery. Just a few extra steps, but it just elevates it to where someone would say, oh, where did you buy that? Which sometimes we want to impress. So in a small saucepan, you will need 1/4 cup, which is 75 grams of, I'm using apricot preserves for this, because what we're doing is putting a glaze on the cake, an apricot glaze. Now, when you do a glaze, you often do it like with fruit tarts. And the reason is, we have our cherries. If you brush a glaze on, especially the fruit, one gives them a really nice shine, and that way they don't dry out is the other reason, so they don't lose their moisture. And plus, even the cake, it just keeps it nice and moist. So there's lots of reasons for a glaze. So what I've just done is put in a small saucepan. You could do this in the microwave. And I'm just going to heat this medium high heat until they start to boil. just take a couple minutes. Okay, so once it starts boiling, take it off the heat. The reason we heat it up is apricot preserves have some of the fruit, pieces of fruit in there, and we don't want that in our glaze. So we have to strain it so it's better if it's warm. So just put a little strainer over a bowl and if you have any leftover glaze, you can just keep it and then reheat it for the next time. But like I said, you don't have to do this. If it's just for the family, you know, you don't have to. Although they probably would like it too. You don't have to do it. So once you get just the fruit left. Now, if it's a little thick, mine's not bad, but it's a little thick, what you can do is thin it out with just a little bit of water, or I'm using Grand Marnier, a little bit of liqueur. Okay. So now, oh, I can smell the Grand Marnier. Take a pastry brush, and then, if you wanted to, you could just do the cherries. See how pretty they look? Nice shine to them. I think it really makes them pop. But I like to do even the cake. Like I said, it'd keep it nice and moist. Plus, I just like the shine of it. And of course, it's a little bit of added flavor to our cake as well, the apricots. So just a very light coating. Don't get carried away. Okay, that looks good. Don't you think? I just think it makes it look kind of shiny, and then we have one more step. What I like to do is put some ground almonds around, well, toasted and chopped, finely chopped almonds. So what I do is take some sliced almonds, just pop them in the oven. I'm using like maybe a third of a cup, 35 grams of sliced almonds. Just put them in the oven for, 6-8 minutes, just until you can see the nice golden brown. And then finally chop them. You could do that in the food processor, or what I often do is just put your almonds in a little bag, and then you can just use a rolling pin or meat pounder, pound. Get those frustrations out. And then what I do is just take, the difference a lot of times between home baking and what you find in pastry shops is the finishing touch to the desserts, which, let's face it, at home, we don't really have the time, or we don't feel like it, who cares? But, if you're making something, a special meal, an occasion, then, it's nice to do these little finishing touches. And they don't really take that much longer, but it really elevates our desserts. And sometimes let's face it, we like to do that, where people go, wow. And why not? We put all the work into it. Doesn't that? I just think that looks wonderful. Just love this cake. So now I'm just going to let this cool down. It's still a little warm. And then when we come back, we'll try a piece. So now to serve the cake, if you have a serving platter and you want to move it, just take a big spatula, pick it up. Now, the bottom plate is still on there. The reason is my cake is still a little warm, which means it's quite soft and fragile. If you want to remove the bottom plate, you're going to have to let this really cool down a couple hours because you want it to firm up. Because if I try to take it off now, I'll probably wreck it. So to take it off, I'll just show you. Take a long spatula and then just put it in between and then run it down, and then you can lift it off. But really make sure that your cake is nice and firm, or it will split and you will be unhappy. So to cut a slice. Now this is good warm out of the oven. It's good at room temperature. I even like it cold. Let's see if I can get around these cherries. Do have that paper. There we go. Oh, you see, it's wonderfully moist. Now, as you see, the cherries did fall to the bottom. But what's so nice about this, we compensate with the cherries sitting on top. So that's where everybody's eye goes. And it's not a really high cake, so you don't really notice. I just love the cherries sitting on top. It is a really flavorful cake. A lot of complex flavor. You have, of course, the sweet Bing cherries, which I just love. But then we have the almond, the ground almonds, plus I added just a little bit of the almond extract. So you get it's not a strong almond flavor. And the ground almonds give it if you use just all flour, you have a more smooth textured cake. This adds just like a little bit of graininess, which I think it makes it more, I don't know, casual, which I think this cake is. It's more like a coffee cake. And then you have a bit of the flavor of the apricot preserve, subtle, but it's there. And then an added crunch of those finely chopped almonds. I just love the look of it, and I think it's a great tasting cake. You could, I must admit, you could serve it like at coffee time or after a meal. You might want to sneak a piece for breakfast. I do. Maybe I shouldn't, but a treat. Let's just say it's a treat. And you can cover and store this several days. As I said, I think at the beginning, it does freeze very well, so you could do that. Put some away. You know, when cherries are in season, make a few and put them in the freezer for other times. You must try it. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of JoyBaking.com.